I need to confess, for many, many years, because I was a policeman in Liverpool, I didn't really like my city.
Sure, yeah.
I didn't love it at all. And I'm thinking, I'm traveling all over the world to tell people about Jesus, and I'm not crossing the road to tell my neighbours about him.
Steve, welcome to Grimké Podcast.
It's great to be here, sir.
So thankful that you're here.
Thank you.
For some of our viewers that may not know or listeners don't know, you're the pastor of Cornerstone Church in Liverpool.
That's correct.
Also the director of Cornerstone Collective, based out of Liverpool, and our Dean of Grimké Europe. So,
Just great stuff.
Yeah. Just wrapped up our first semester, and I wanted to sit down and kind of talk further about your story. Pastoral ministry of the last 20 years, church revitalization, planting, and all the other little details in between. So
That's great.
Yeah.
Excited to share.
Yeah. Well, why don't you start by sharing, how did you get into ministry? And
Not a problem. I was born into a Christian home. Great blessing. That was. Both my parents were first generation Christians, so their parents were Christians. So I grew up in a context where mum and dad loved Jesus, loved people, had a house. Our home was open all the time. All sorts of people staying with us, in and out. Lots of people who are now at Cornerstone, who are a little bit older than me, would say that my parents were a great blessing and also instruments for them to come to know the Lord Jesus. So I've been in the context of like gospel life, gospel ministry.
Now I met both your parents.
Oh, you've met them both. They're great,
and they're amazing.
They are
Love
amazing.
Christ, full of joy. So you can see it.
Yeah. Like I like to talk, you like to talk. My dad likes to talk.
Your dad really likes to talk.
He likes to talk, which is great.
Phil, if you're watching, you know I love you.
Yeah, that's right.
It's great.
So my parents are real blessings, so I'm thankful for that. So grew up in a great church that loved the Lord, preached the gospel. I was really encouraged by that, and then became a Christian as a child. And I think, like lots of folk who become Christians as children, there's a sense that this is what we believe. I know it to be true.
Right.
And then as I get older, the reality of grace kicks in a little bit. And for me, that happened. I became a police officer at 19. So I left school at 18. Oh,
wow.
Became a cop.
Yeah.
In Liverpool. So I went from being a schoolboy to living in a man's world overnight.
Overnight. 19.
Overnight. And bear in mind, I grew up in a Christian home as well, so I was sheltered
for
a number of things in light of that.
You didn't get hauled off to jail too often.
No, I didn't. I hauled a lot of people off to jail. I was very good at it.
That's right.
That's right, yeah. So became a police officer at 19, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Apart from wanting to be a professional soccer player, footballer.
Oh, yeah.
Which I still thought that I could do when I got to about the age of 42, but I've come to realize that that's not going to happen.
Well, that last time we were at your house, we played, basically keep away in a circle. So I grew up playing football and playing soccer.
We did.
And I was on medication for about a week after, as my knees were so swollen. So I need to. I need to just retire doing anything.
That's right. Yeah. So became a police officer at 19. I absolutely loved it. Yeah. And the Lord did a great work in that time with me, in the sense that I was exposed to the brokenness of the world in the way that I'd never seen before. And I look back, and obviously there was a lot of pain in that, and difficulty in trying to process those things. Yeah. But I'm also thankful for that, bearing in mind where the Lord has me now and what we're doing. I'm married to Sean, and we've got 4 children. We got married at 21, been together since we were 17. Yeah. Again, which I'm thankful for. She's a real blessing. So I was in the police till I was 25. Oh wow! I always thought that I wanted to stay as a police officer.
I didn't. That was similar for me. I was 20, 25 for doing heavy construction. So
yeah. So I was 25 years of age. I didn't go to university. Went straight into the police. I was 25. Ended up leaving the police to go into Christian ministry, but not church ministry straight away. Okay. I ended up working for a Christian relief and development agency. Oh, wow. And I worked in the UK with volunteers doing lots of different things, and then but ended up spending a lot of my time in Eastern Europe and Africa. Wow. Traveling. And part of that was evangelism. So I was doing a lot of evangelism amongst the communities where the charity was doing work. Okay. So I was able to share the gospel, and just engage with the people that we were doing a lot of ministry. So during that time, I became an elder of the church that I grew up in.
Okay, yeah.
Which was a real blessing for me and also the church.
About what time was that?
I was 2000 and, let me do the math.
So how old were you?
I was 25. So it was I was 20. When 25, 26, when I left the police, I became an elder of the church.
Okay.
So I was based at home but traveling. So I'd be away for a couple of weeks and back. So we went long. I wasn't long term in any of the countries, but I traveled all over working in different contexts. And it was really interesting. It was during that time we were part of a church that loved the Lord, But what it did is the Lord threw me into a world where I had to think about my theology. So in any sort of Christian NGO, non-government organization, you have believers who have different understandings regarding theological issues. Yeah. So it threw me into that, and I had to really think through: did I believe what I said I believed? Yeah. In lots of different areas, and some primary issues and secondary issues. So I was really thankful for that, because I've been in a context where I was like, I totally don't agree with what you're saying, but you really do love Jesus, and I've got to figure this out. What does this mean? What does this look like? Right. So I had that going on whilst traveling all over the world, whilst also working with Christians from different parts of the world who were in their communities, reaching the communities and planting churches. Right. And a lot of these folks were my age. So like in Kibera, one of the biggest slums in Kenya, in Africa, in Pristina, Kosovo, in Baku, Azerbaijan, different places like that where I would be spending time. And folks in their late 20s planting churches, reaching their community. One particular church in Pristina, which is the capital of Kosovo, 98% Muslim, Christian folk, just reaching the community with the gospel. Yeah. Brave planting churches. And it was during that time that the Lord was doing a work with me. I was an elder in the church where we were at, and I was traveling all over the world, telling people about Jesus, engaging in the ministries of what they were doing, and being completely sort of inspired, yet also convicted that these folks really love their cities. Yeah. Now, for me, it was interesting. I'm from Liverpool. Mm-hmm. I love being from Liverpool. And what the nickname, the name that people have for those from Liverpool, we're called Scousers. Okay. Proud of that. I go anywhere in the world, people know what that means and who that are. But I need to confess, for many, many years, because I was a policeman in Liverpool, I didn't really like my city. Sure, yeah. I didn't love it at all, really. Right. And
see the worst bits.
Yeah, well, that was the issue, really. But I was proud of coming from there. Yeah. I'm traveling around all these different cities and countries, and these people love Jesus primarily. They love the church, and they love the people that they were with. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I'm traveling all over the world to tell people about Jesus, and I'm not crossing the road to tell my neighbors about him. And I was an elder in a church, and people were coming to the church, and it was growing, and I was involved in ministry in different ways in the life of the church. But the Lord did a real work on me over the course of a number of years. And one, a love for the scriptures and theology, a love for the church, an understanding and a love for the church that I didn't have, and a real love for my city, for Liverpool. And a love came because of seeing the brokenness. Right. A love that came because the desperate need of people needed to know about the gospel and the Lord Jesus. So to cut a long story short, that it was over a number of years. That also interspersed with Sean and I nearly leaving Liverpool I was often approached by a number of different churches to become pastors or assistant pastors or youth ministers in different places, some in London, Scotland, different places around. But every time we went to speak to the particular churches, the conclusion was always, not only for Sean and I, but also for those folks as well, you need to stay in Liverpool. Yeah. You need to stay there. Yeah. Now, this was all happening as well, whilst there was a real an upturn in church planting that was happening all over the world. Right. Of which, that's how you and I got to know each other, through different ministries that we've been part of over the years. So I'm listening about church planting, I'm reading about church planting, and I'm thinking Liverpool needs more churches. And maybe this, Lord, this is what you're calling me into, this is what it may be. So that became my desire. So around about the age of 29, 30, Sean and I had been praying, and we really felt the Lord was calling us to plant a church in Liverpool. Ended up a bit of a situation going on with the church that I was in, and I was an elder. And I remember writing a paper, which it all leads into where we're at really. I wrote this paper to the church that we were part of. And it was a paper about church planting.
Yeah.
All the different forms of church planting, the need for church planting as a whole, but the biblical sort of mandate for church planting, and then the need for us as a city, and then how we could engage in that as a church.
Yeah.
But what I also wrote in the letter was a section about church replanting and revitalization.
Yeah.
And I wrote in that section about the need of churches that were all over our city that needed revitalizing. So Liverpool historically is quite a religious city,
yeah.
a large Catholic community. And where there's a large Catholic community in the UK, there's often a very strong Protestant community.
Yeah.
And there were lots of brethren assemblies, little gospel halls, and they have been dying. So they'd have 4, 5, 10, 15 people in these churches everywhere. And I, along with some of the younger guys, would be like preaching in these churches on Sundays and encouraging them. So I listed these churches and I said, look, wouldn't it be great if we approach these churches to see what we could do in partnership with them, to help them, to support them, to replant, revitalize, whatever would be the right thing to do. And I listed a number of churches that I knew of. Some of them I had relationships with, some I didn't have relationships with, but I listed them. And gave the paper and discussed it as elders. And 4 weeks after that, I got a phone call from a gentleman called Alan Taylor. You've met, Mr. T, we call him. Mr. T, who's now in his early 80s. And he called me and said, Steve, would you come and meet with the elders of Ramilies Road Chapel?
Okay.
A little brethren assembly that had a little chapel on a road called Ramilies Road. Yeah. And that's just off the famous Penny Lane in Liverpool, which is the community where I grew up in. And so I met with them and they shared their situation. It was a church that was planted in 1933.
Wow.
They took ownership of that particular site where there was a building in 1945. The church grew. They had a large children's ministry, lots and lots of people. And it was a church in the 60s and 70s and early 80s especially where lots of people went. But then over the course of time from the 80s right up to the late noughties, the church really declined in numbers. That's because there was a few of the churches that had started, but families moved out. So Ramilies is like an inner city area. Right. And Penny Lane's like an inner city area. So people were moving a little bit further out to the suburbs, I guess, to some extent, to bigger homes. It's in the middle of like lots of row homes. Yeah. So the bigger homes with more gardens, yards for families and stuff. And the demographic of the area changed. So there were lots of families, and then it became a bit more young professionals and students and some asylum seekers that had come in. So the church just declined. And they were down to about 12 to 15 on a Sunday. And so they explained this to me. And the phrase that they used with me, that we are burying more people than we are baptizing. And we're not comfortable with that. And we want to see more people come to know the Lord Jesus in our community. So they said to me, Steve, if you came here, what would you do? Now, they didn't know anything about this paper that I'd written to the elders of my church. They didn't have a clue. So I'm like, okay. And
said, they were one of the churches listed.
They were one of the churches listed, and they didn't know. Yeah. So I was like, wow, okay. And I just explained I had no grid for what church replanting or revitalization. I think there's a difference there, which we can talk about, I guess, later. So I said, I've got no grid for what that could mean, but this is what the Lord's put on my heart regarding planting churches. Right. And I just said, look, I want to plant churches, and this is this is what it would be. I want to preach the gospel. Right. I want to be present amongst the people. I want us to be present in the community. Right. And I want to disciple, train men so that we can plant churches. Yeah. And it sounded like a pie in the sky to them, obviously, as you can imagine. And they were like, okay.
You added the last one, take over the world.
We're going to take over the world. That's what it's going to be. And we ended up, they said, and I remember it was a Thursday evening, and they said to me, could we meet again in a week? And these gentlemen, like, one gentleman was in his late 80s. The rest were all in like the 60s.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, fine. So a week later, I met with them and they sat in front of me and said, Steve, would you come and be our pastor? Now, that was big for two reasons. Number one, it was really big because Brethren assemblies don't recognize one man to be the pastor.
Right.
They hold to plurality of elders, which we do.
Sure.
But that, in a sense, that they would never pay anybody to be an elder or a pastor in the life of the church. So that was really big for them. It was another issue because theologically we were slightly on different pages, the dispensationalist. So we had to figure some stuff out there and engage with that.
Right.
But then also, it was a big deal because here are men who are leading this church, and the reality at that time was they were leading it to closure.
Yeah, right.
And it was a big deal for them to say, how we're leading is not right, we need help. And I always say they were that desperate, they had to ask me.
Right, yeah.
So that's how desperate it was. So
it was a big humble.
Very humbling.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that. And they said, would it be the pastor? And my response to them is that I don't think me coming on my own would be the right thing or the best thing. So they said, so I said, if I was to gather a team of people, not a large team, maybe another 12 or 15 people.
Right.
And what would they be open for me to bring that team of people to partner alongside, not to take over, to work together to see if this church can be replanted.
Yeah.
And they began to cry at the table.
Yeah.
But because obviously those 15 people would be a lot younger as well.
Sure.
I was 31 at the time. We had 2 kids, Sean and I.
Yeah.
And I said the only other stipulation, well, I didn't use the word stipulation, but the only other thing that I said was, of those 15 people, I'm going to bring 2 men who are elders by way of qualification.
Right.
And I'm not saying they become elders straight away, but they're elders by way of qualification now.
Right.
Good, godly men. I'm not just going to bring anyone. I said, but can they sit into the elders meetings with us? Because if we're going to do this, we need to do it from the off. And they agreed to that. It was really interesting. So about 6 months later, I worked with the team of 15 people. I worked with the church over that time when we agreed to go. And about 6 months after that meeting, we all ended up at the church. So we had 27 people.
Wow.
And an eldership of 7.
That's a lot of pastoral care per person.
Pastoral care. That's right. That's great. But I think, but I think it was really helpful because my conviction now is the reality is this: the health of a church is determined by the health of its leadership.
That's right. Yeah.
The direction of the church is when we look at churches that have closed, it's because of poor leadership.
Right.
Churches that go liberal, it's because of poor, unhealthy leadership. So, and I'm not saying having lots of elders means health, but in that context, we had to really work out at that level.
Right.
And that was November 2009. Yeah. And that began, it's 15 years now, just over 15 years. That began a wonderful journey of God's grace. He's been so kind. The way I describe it, he's given me a front row seat to watch. God the Father's given me a front row seat to watch his son build his church.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened.
That's right.
And he's been so kind to me in different ways. By God's grace, we saw the church replanted, started to grow, people started to get saved. Since that time, we've planted 4 churches. 4 churches. We've helped revitalize about 2 or 3 churches. We formed the Cornerstone Collective, which is a communion of churches that are in partnership together to reach Merseyside with the gospel. So we want to plant churches there, and all those churches have either been planted by or revitalized by Cornerstone over that, or a Cornerstone Collective church over that time. And I say all that to say how wonderful the Lord has been. Lots and lots of people have been saved. But apart from one of those gentlemen who's gone to be with Jesus, and another gentleman that's retired and moved out of the city, they're all still with us.
Wow.
Apart from one of the ladies who's gone to be with Jesus, all the original people are still with us. Yeah. So the prayers of these folks for many, many years. And it's interesting as you start, when we start to get under the surface of what was happening and what was going on in different areas, and there's lots we could, I guess, talk about on what it looked like to replant a church and the things we had to walk through. It was. I say to those men that leadership decision, the humble leadership decision, was one of the best decisions that they could have made. Yeah. And then when you go under the surface of that there are a number of women in the church that have been praying for 10 years.
Yeah.
But they humbly respected the leadership, prayed for the leadership, asked the Lord to work amongst the men, for the men, those elders to make that decision, and they did. So it's just, and all those women are still with us, apart from one who's got to be with Jesus. So that's such a blessing to see their faces when they, and now you would speak to one of those elders, Roy Hughes, who's no longer an elder, but still a member of our church, and he would turn to you and he would say, we are now baptizing more people than we're burying.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And it's just a beautiful story to see the faces of older saints, even at the end, in their twilight years, believing and praying and stepping in, to see, churches becoming healthy.
Yeah.
Churches planted, people coming to know the Lord Jesus Christ. Yeah. They haven't seen a baptism for, I think, 30 years.
Wow.
They're seeing people get baptized, and spontaneous baptisms. Yeah. Which some of them had never seen in their lives. Yeah. So the Lord has done such a wonderful work in this little chapel in the back streets of Liverpool. We've got a bigger building now and different buildings and stuff. So he's blessed us in so many different ways. But it's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story. And, I'm just privileged that I get to sit on the front seat and watch Jesus do his thing.
That's so wonderful. Now,
that's a long way of answering the question.
It's great. So would you say you guys are more of a church plant, church revitalization? Maybe what's the difference? A little bit of both?
It's interesting because I think...
It's not clear line sometimes?
No, it's not a clear line. I think in the purest sense, we are a church replant. So I actually distinguish replanting and revitalizing. Yeah. So I think, but to answer your question, I think there are lots of things that overlap with planting a church. Right. Now so effectively, I had 15 younger people. I had 15 older people. 3 of those people left straight away. That's why we had the 27. Yep. So we had 15 older people, and I brought those people together, and we did something.
That's right. Yeah.
Now we did something in a building that was already there. There was a little bit of money there, not too much. Yeah. And the older folks have been there, many of them since they were children. Yeah. So it was an existing church in the community that God had used over time. It wasn't something new necessarily, but it was it was a new wineskin with new wine.
Oh, that's right.
What I mean? In a sense, in terms of what came about. So a lot of the ways of leading, I think, overlap in terms of when you're planting. Yeah. The difference with, if I'd have gone and planted the church with those 15 younger folk, right, we could have made decisions a bit quicker. Mm-hmm. I think we would have been on the same page theologically quicker. Yeah. And we were able to move. And in one sense, they're starting something new. So people are happy to walk away from what they know, what they thought they were. Right. Because it's quite interesting, even at a young age, how entrenched we can be in our own preference, even when we're younger. Yeah. But it may be quicker to move in certain areas. With the older folk, I just had to take a little bit more time. Yeah. The older folk, there were certain things that you had to lovingly and graciously show and reveal. Yeah. Because a lot of the things that needed to change were things that were wrong. Right. They just weren't best.
That's right, yeah.
And if you go in and just kill things straight away, right, you're actually ripping the soul out of some things for these people. Yeah. And some of these folks in the 70s have been to the church since they've been 11 and 12. Wow. And don't know any different. Mm. If it's sinful, get rid of it straight away. Sure, yeah. But in terms of preference and cultural issues, just needed to happen over time. So it's having the wisdom to making the right call at the right time in the right way, but also having the courage to make those decisions because of the long-term conviction and of what you believe the Lord is calling you to as a pastor, but also as a church in the community, but also to what the scriptures say. Because a lot of the preferences, even though they're not sinful, sometimes can be misunderstood or misinterpreted, which sounds like it's sinful.
Sure, yeah.
Misinterpreted things. So like how communion is administered.
Sure, yeah. Right.
A lot of that is preference.
Sure, yeah.
A lot of it is preference. So therefore you've got to figure that out. But for these guys, it was like a Protestant mass, the way it was done. Sure. I had to take my time because how do we lovingly do this? And actually we had some sweet times in the way that they did it, but it just wasn't best. Yeah. So it's all those things. So in one sense, to answer your question, it's very similar to planting.
Right, that's right.
But there are some certain things that are different. The reason why I call it a replant and not revitalization, because I think it's like when you pot a plant, you have to take it out of that pot. You have to break it up a bit, and we have to put it into something new with a bit of new soil. You can actually revitalize a plant in its original pot by adding a bit of plant food, a bit more compost or whatever. You don't need to completely shift it. And I think that's the difference.
Right.
So, and then also the replanting element is there are new things that are going to be pumped into here in a significant, stark way. Yeah. So it's also having the courage. Whereas there are classic things that I think a church can get to where it requires a replant. So financially, there's no money. Right. Leadership is poor. It could be a sinful element, but it could be just an age issue as well to certain areas. So lots of different things. But I think there are churches that don't look like that. They may have lots of money in the bank. It might seem that they have thriving leadership, and there might be lots of people that actually need revitalizing because it's not healthy. And when you look at the Lord, when you look in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, and the Lord Jesus is speaking to these churches. Of the 7, 5 of them, he's actually calling them to change. Yeah, he's calling out sin. He's calling out misdirection. So let's take the church in Ephesus. On the face of it, we would look at that, probably a large church that loves the word. That's right. But they lost their first love. And Jesus says, if you don't get that back, I'm going to remove that lampstand. Right. It's a call to revitalization. So the way I describe it with us at Ramilies, now Cornerstone Church, we changed the name after a few years. We didn't do that straight away. Sure. Is that we've replanted the church once and we've revitalized 14 times. Yeah. Because we've had to, every year, that's great. Be reminded again, what is our conviction? What is the Lord doing? And constantly doing that all the time. And don't get me wrong, it's not like a full sit down with a whiteboard and re-examine. Sometimes it's just little things you're like, we need to get back. And so, I've worked very closely with my colleague Paul Elms, who knows on faculty at Grimké Europe as well. We've worked very closely together, and we'll have conversations. I'm like, just over coffee, and it's like, we're missing this. We need to get back to this. Yeah. Or sometimes it's a full eldership piece, and sometimes it's people within the congregation, and more often than not, it's the older folks who were there at the beginning who would be saying to us, it feels like we're drifting a little bit. Yeah. Not in a critical way. Sure, yeah. And you're like, I think you're right. Let's revitalize. Let's get us back on track. So that's been a real blessing to see that and make that happen. Yeah. So there are similarities, but there are differences.
In every church scenario, church plant, replant, revitalization, everyone's unique. Yes. And and they have unique things that they bring to the table. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking, what a great blessing, all the richness, the stability, longevity, especially that you guys had with revitalizing all those wonderful saints who have been Christians a long time. And all the contextual knowledge, all the deep relationships in the community. When we planted, it was just the 25 young folks. And it took us a long time to have a lot of folks that were Christians for a long time, lot older. The hardest demographic for us was the age demographic, actually, as we planned. So each one scenario, and they have different things that kind of they bring to the table to make sure we stay focused on the gospel and continue to revitalize constantly. Absolutely. Now you guys have planted a considerable amount of churches and revitalized. Yes. How's that come about? What's gone into that?
Well, it came about because that's what our conviction was right from the beginning. Right, yeah. So around that table,
you didn't just fall into it.
We didn't just fall into it, and we didn't respond to us being too busy. We planted the first church, so we revitalized 2009. We planted our first church in 2013. Yeah. And we went full. We had a small chapel building at the time, probably about 70 people comfortably. At that time, we were probably about 50 people. Yeah. So we sent
That's the one we've been by.
Yes, yeah. We sent a small group of people and a guy there to lead that to an area of the Liverpool region called the Wirral. Yeah. And Cornerstone Wirral we planted. So initially we planted a congregation. We called it a congregation. So we were one church, 2 locations. But in our context and in our time, very quickly we realized that actually wasn't helpful. No, that's right. It wasn't too helpful. So we decided when we planted again that actually we'd separate out the churches to be more autonomous, but very interdependent. Hence, the Cornerstone Collective started. But to answer your question, the church planting has been something that convictionally we did from sitting around the table with those 4 older gentlemen. They said, "What would you do if you came here?" And I said, "Well, this is what I want to see happen."
Yeah,
and that's what my heart is. And I'm convinced biblically that as a church we need to be thinking and praying and being involved in planting more churches,
right, yeah.
whether that's locally or internationally. I think that the mission of God to reach the world is through His church. So therefore, we need more of them.
Yeah.
So I think that's been our conviction, and it's been the heartbeat of who we are and how we respond, which actually shapes a lot of the stuff and how we function as a church.
Right.
In terms of, we do a lot of stuff in smaller communities, gospel communities we call them, in the context of neighborhoods. Yeah. Some of them have become churches over time. So it's a great opportunity for people to grow in their leadership, men to grow in pastoral leadership as well, and caring and loving for people and being present and shepherding people. So that's really helped us in moving forward. So planting churches has been something that we've been doing from the beginning pretty much, but also it's been something that's been a real blessing for us. Yeah. And because of our story as a church that did a replant and revitalization, we've been approached by a lot of churches to help them. Yeah. And we also feel that the Lord has put a calling on us as a church and a group of churches to be a blessing to those churches that are looking for help to replant and revitalize. Yeah. So we've been able to do that. And some of those churches aren't in the Cornerstone collectives. We've just gone and helped them, supported them, in all different ways, consulted and encouraged and sought to bless. And that's been a real blessing. So all the churches that we've planted or revitalized are in Merseyside, apart from one, which is in Romania, Timișoara, which is a guy that got saved in Liverpool from Romania, who's moved back with his wife and has planted a church in Timișoara, and we're a big supporter of him. In Vlad, he's doing Grimké Europe, which is exciting. So there's lots of different. So to answer your question, how's it gone? It's been great.
It's been beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's, it's funny because it's beautiful in the sense that it's such a blessing. It's what we do. But I cry like a baby every time we send people out. Right. And I think partly is because you do life with these people. You train and you disciple, you love, you engage, you get so close. And then you send them. It's like sending your kids. Yeah. It's the right thing to do. You'd want to do it and you love. But there's also that sense of like, okay, you're sending them into something for the long term. Yeah. They're not just going on vacation, they're going on the long term. So this interaction and this love that we've been having with deep communion, because that's something that we really try and foster, real deep relational communion, is we're sending that out for the sake of the glory of Christ and other people coming to know Him. So you'll see me at the front laying on hands, we're praying. I can't pray, I'm crying. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, sort of like childbirth pains, I guess. Not that I know what that's like. I've seen my wife go through it. I know what that's like. But there is that. And then what it also does is create potential tensions in the fact that the folks that go are more often than not the folks that are really plugged into the life of the church. So therefore, we've got to find others to do that. But God, miraculously, every time, His people step up.
Yeah, that's right.
His people step up. So the Lord, the Lord's not going to call us to do something if He's not going to provide for all of what He's calling us to do. Yeah. And I think what church planting does is also create other people to grow in their giftings and grow in ministry areas that they may not get that opportunity to do. Yeah. Also, what church planting does is it makes you as a pastor, whether you're the lead pastor, sole pastor, whatever, actually it helps you fulfill. I actually think one of the primary callings of what it is to be a pastor is to give unto faithful men so they can do likewise. I think if we're not doing that, we're actually not fulfilling a big part of what it is to be a pastor.
Yeah, it's good.
And I think if our heart is we want to plant churches, we know we're going to be sending guys out. And by God's grace, we've grown, so we need more pastors at Liverpool to preach, to share. Yeah. But that, I think, one of the other tensions in that is that you, as a pastor, have to see that your role is also is yes to shepherd people, but it's also to create the atmosphere and platform for others to grow in what it is to be pastors and enable them to preach and and shepherd and create those opportunities to do and plant. Because I think if you don't have that, you might plant one church, but you won't do it again.
Right, talk a little bit more about that, because obviously you guys have had intentionality from day one. But it doesn't just, kind of like happen magically. There's been a lot of intentionality of the process. What's the process look like for you guys?
So for us now, and to be honest with you, it's always been the case, but I think we're a bit more structured around it. For us now, so we're constantly praying, asking the Lord to reveal to us where He wants us to plant. So our primary area, our primary prayer, our primary focus is Merseyside, which is the Liverpool city region.
Yeah.
Constantly praying, Lord, where do you want us to plant? Where do you want us to be? Now, the reality is this: on one level, we could plant anywhere and it'd be great.
Yeah.
But we also we wanted to make it clear to us at what point, what time, because I think often the community of where we're praying for often fits in with the desire of the person that's going to lead.
Yeah,
and you want the Lord to do a work in that. And we're praying we've prayed for communities, whilst the Lord's been working on the heart of somebody that doesn't even come to Cornerstone at this point.
Yeah.
And then they've gone on and planted.
Yeah.
So we start with, Lord, where do you want us to plant next?
Yeah.
And then that's coincided, okay, well, Lord, we want to plant. We've got this conviction, but we need men to lead that.
Yeah.
We need men to lead that. So obviously discipleship of men has been key for us in that. Discipleship, and then poured into developing them as leaders and pastors. And I think just on that point, just very quickly, I think one of the reasons, especially in our context in terms of the UK, where I think there's a leadership deficit, clear leadership deficit, is because I think we've jumped over discipling men well.
Sure.
I think we just think leaders are going to walk in.
Yeah, just happens naturally.
When any man that walks in the room is potentially a leader. I'm not saying every man is a leader, but we've got to disciple them as men.
That's right.
So therefore, we're praying for age, we're seeking to disciple guys. I think we've done that well in the past. Sometimes we've not done that too well.
Yeah.
I think it fluctuates. You disciple them, and then the opportunities of what does it look like to take some of these guys, faithful men, and give unto them.
Yeah.
Get them to have a tenacity for the word of God and flow, so that they can do others. So the process is pray, disciple, pray for the guys. And our structure to do that, so the construct of where that's happened is, all our guys that have planted churches, apart from the one who's going to plant next, have all sort of done a church planter residency with us. Yeah. And some of that has been really ad hoc.
Right.
But it's been a form of residency. It's more like the first guy that went with us, he just hung out with me for 2 years. And
He was in resident
full time. But it was like, this will be good. Or, whatever, there was nothing.
Sure, yeah.
We did some church planter assessment stuff and everything that came with that we sent him. And like now the last guys that have gone into a bit more formal, more structure, more reading. Some of the guys have gone through different theological seminaries to do some training as well at different levels. Up to some of the guys that are actually on Grimké as well. So doing different things to try and make that happen. But this residency has been something that prepares guys well. Yeah. Now, what we do is we don't employ guys to work in the church with a view to plant a church.
Right.
What we always do is we have a resident, they come purely and solely to think and pray about church planting. Yeah. Because what that does is it makes it really clear for them, and makes it really clear for the church.
Right.
So if we were to employ a guy we need an assistant pastor, but we also want to plant a church.
That's good.
So why don't we, if we said, okay, well, let's employ an assistant pastor with a view to plant a church.
Right.
It's just confusion for everyone.
Yeah, that's right.
The person that applies either just wants to be an assistant pastor, which is fine, wants to be an assistant pastor, or he wants to be a church planter.
Right.
And the reality is this: very rarely will you get a guy that wants to do both.
Yeah, sure.
And then the church, and so, well, we've got an assistant pastor. Well, he needs to be serving us.
Right.
Oh no, but we need them to think about planting in this context, in this community.
Right.
And then there's all sorts of confusion. So we have a church planter residency. People apply to do it. We raise some money. They are to raise some money, because if you're going to plant a church, you've got to you've got to work out what that means and what that looks like.
That's right.
And we spend time praying. They pray about an area. They think it through. And we know very quickly if it's going to work or not. Yeah, so there are a couple of off-ramps. And then they find the area, they do life with God's people, and all their time is thinking and praying and getting ready to plant a church, gather teams, and then walk out from there. The next one we're going to do is actually someone that's been on staff for about 6-7 years.
Yeah.
And it's Ben, you know him, he's going to grow, and he's currently a pastor at Cornerstone. So that's a different thing for us, because it's like he's going to go and plant. So we've actually got to fill that gap.
Yeah.
Now, which is fine. So it's not a pure science. It's not a silver bullet.
Oh, that's right.
There's not a blueprint that we can just roll out all the time. But the residencies has been something that's been really helpful for us, because there's a real intentionality in what we're going to do, the time, but also the finances for what that happens. And I think that's been helpful for our church, and it means that we're able to do things a little bit quicker.
Yeah. So Grimké Europe.
Yes, sir.
How does that fit into planting, revitalization, all the things that you've seen God do and continue to do, will do?
Yeah, I think like Grimké Europe fits right into it. Okay. And even we've known each other for a long, long time, partnered together for a long, long time. But just the conversation of you coming to speak to me about Grimké Europe and what that could look like actually came the day after I was actually saying we need something like Grimké Europe.
Right.
Not Grimké Europe, I just said we need something like Grimké.
Yeah.
And I think partly where it fits in for us specifically is that I think at Cornerstone Collective, I think we have a good context.
Yeah.
So I think there's a context of community, churchmanship, I think, in terms of what that looks like in the life of the church. But for us at the Cornerstone Collective, there was a level of content, but also a level of content that I think we needed to enhance. Sure. We wanted to have enhanced.
Right.
Coupled with a context of learning, not only in the local church, but a context of learning where men could be around other men, thinking about what it means to be pastors.
It's good.
To become sharp in that area. And I think over the time, the sharpness of how we train men has blunted a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it's blunted a little bit because of the opportunities that are created, and therefore lots of other people, hear me when I say this, people to do theological training, of which we're all for.
Sure.
Men, women, and when I say for women to do theological training, but also men that aren't called to pastoral ministry, we want people to grow, as Francis Grimké says, to be better Christians.
Well, that's right.
So therefore to grow theologically. But I think what has happened is there is and not everyone agrees with me on this, and that's okay. Yeah. But I think from our perspective, what was happening was you're losing the sharpness of having men in a room who are doing papers about what it looks like to be pastors, to think theologically, thickly as well, and with a weightiness. And what does that look like? And how is that applied in the context of being pastors?
Good, yeah.
And I think we were losing that a little bit. And I think, and I wanted to see a sharpness of that. I saw what was happening in Grimké, and I just said, I'd love something like that. Yeah. The next day, you actually came and spoke to me. Yeah. Literally, that's how supernatural it was.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I mean? And it was like, okay, we need to talk about this. We need to figure this out. What does this look like? And I think, so that's one reason. The other reason I think Grimké is helpful is the fraternal element of it. Okay. My experience and the experience of some of our colleagues that have trained in different contexts is that we've trained with other guys at a similar stage that wanted to plant churches, all in the room thinking about this, wrestling with this. Right. And we've grown together over the course of the 15 years. I think that's been lost in the UK a little bit in the same way. Especially for those of us who may not have the opportunity or the finances or the inclination or desire to go and do 3 years in a seminary full time. Where you're going to build those relationships. Yeah. Whereas it's how can we do that? Having guys in situ, learning from pastors who have lots of experience for context, but also having the weightiness of theological training from pastor theologians. Yeah. So pastors who are well read, who are qualified as ordained pastors to be able to train men effectively. So for us, it just marries greatly. Yeah. I think we have a context of discipling men and helping men grow to be good leaders and pastors. Yeah. Grimké allows that to bring a thickness to their theological understanding and a weightiness that applied correctly, communicated in the pub, walking down the street with the guy that's got the guy that's got the porn addiction, or the married couple that are struggling, or the guy that's just lost his wife. helps.
Yeah.
And grows and means that, and helps for longevity of ministry.
Good.
So I was excited when you came to speak to us. I'm excited about what that looks like. The Lord clearly was raising up desires and affections to make those things happen. And, I think the need is big in the UK, especially in sort of working class backgrounds.
Yeah.
Many men that would love to do theological training just don't get the opportunity.
That's right. Yeah.
I think Grimké gives us that. I think holding it in a city like Liverpool helps as well. But also opening up the door for not just the UK, but the whole of Europe.
That's right, yeah.
Because the need is great in the UK, the need is greater in mainland Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of my brothers who are leading churches out there want to develop people, they're on their own.
Yep.
There aren't many Reformed, complementarian, gospel-centered networks to be part of. So being able to open up this, to see guys from mainland Europe to come and train and to receive, even if it's for a short time, that element of fraternal in the midst of weighty theological training, I think is vitally important. And I think we overlook that in our context. Just train them, just give them the stuff.
Right.
But I can go and get the stuff online.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
We could go and get the stuff online. Right. The context of how we're doing things at Grimké.
Yeah.
I think how we're doing things at Cornerstone Collective, which we want to be a blessing to encourage other people to do something similar in local areas, is something that you can't get online.
Right. No.
You have to be face to face.
Right,
you have to grow those deep relationships. And the issue is this. I want the guys that we're training twofold. First and foremost, I want them to be in partnership with other men who are serving not only in the UK, but in the United States and all over Europe, and grow as friends and owe it to each other to finish well.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think, theology does that, relationship does that, the Spirit of God, obviously, in the midst of all that, sustaining us. I think that's important. And there are too many guys on their own.
Yeah.
And I think Grimké helps us to grow that. That's the first bit. The other bit is this. Me and you, we're not old men, but we're definitely not young men.
Not young, not
but
old.
We're on we're only going in one direction. And when I went and revitalized Ramilies Road, I was on my own, right? And I wasn't on my own because I had Paul and others, those men. But what I mean is, as what it meant to be a pastor, I was pretty much on my own. Right. And there was a generation of us in our city of a similar age. We didn't really know each other that well. We're really good friends now. We didn't really know each other that well. And this is not a criticism of the men that have gone before. It's not a criticism, because I don't think anyone did it for them.
Right.
Just that grid of what it looked like for older men to pour in.
Yeah. And
pour in a really significant way.
That's right.
In a Pauline way. You know what I mean? What does that look like? And I think Grimké also gives us another vehicle and a construct and an opportunity for us to do that well.
Yeah.
I don't want, when I'm 60, Bri, to hear of young men in Liverpool in their 20s and 30s looking to plant churches and saying, where are the older guys pouring into us?
Yeah.
I don't want that. I don't want that to be the case. I want us to be pouring in, helping, encouraging, and also being blessed by them. Yeah. And I think Grimké and how we're seeking to do it in Europe is something that not only just in Liverpool, but could happen and roll out all over the continent. Yeah. That's my heart, my hope for it.
Yeah. Well, thankful for that. Thankful for this time. I'm looking forward to.
I love you, man. Thank you for
do the same.
letting us do it.
Thankful. So
God bless you.
Yeah.